Syarifah Fatimah Al-Zahra binti Syed Hussein Al-Attas, Deputy Deans, Deputy Director, Head of Departments, Head of Research, Professors, Associate Professors, Doctors, Academic Members, and last but not least, our young graduates and students. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah walhamdulillah thumma alhamdulillah. Praise to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are able to convene this morning to participate in HadissusSobah organized by Kuliah of Islamic Reading Knowledge and Human Sciences, International Islamic University, Malaysia. My name is Siti Amira binti Muhammad Arif. I am a graduate of Usuluddin and Comparative Religion, and I am the Assistant Secretary of the Reading Knowledge and Human Sciences Graduate Society, RESOP, and it is an honor for me to be the MC for this session. And on behalf of the Kuliah, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you. All right, before we go further, let us begin our program today with the recitation of Kitab Al-Fatiha. Amin, amin, ya Rabbal Alamin. Without wasting any time, before I invite our speaker for today, let me briefly introduce our speaker. Her full name is Assistant Professor Dr. Syarifah Fatimah Al-Zahra binti Syed Hussein Al-Attas from the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, and she is also a member of International Sociology Association. She even received a Gold for Community and Industry Partner Award, and among her current research projects are menstrual health among Rohingya population in Malaysia, investigating menstrual hygiene and practice needs among female Rohingya, as well as progress and problems related to enforcement of free speech in Malaysia. All right, so before I hand over the session to Dr. Fatimah, let me inform that she will be delivering her talk for 30 minutes, and then we will open the session for Q&A for about 50 minutes. All right, so, and you guys are welcome to share your questions in the chat box. Okay, so without wasting any time, I will welcome Dr. Fatimah. Falyatafaddal mashkura wa majkura.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much to the organizing committee, respectable Prof. Shukran, the Dean, Deputy Deans, Professors, Associate Professors, Assistant Professors, academics, administrative staff, and our beloved students and all. I am very, very humbled to be here, actually, to be invited to speak on this particular topic. And I think I will try my best and hopefully deliver and start a conversation around some of the issues that I think really much relates to what we do all the time, every day, as academic members who exist within our kuliah and also existing within the larger social context. I didn't know that I only had 30 minutes, but that's all right. We'll speed through the slides. Okay, the slides are on.
Yes.
Okay, all right, that's good. So today we're here to discuss on, or for me to share some of the things that I think are pertinent to discuss when we're talking about academic professions and our roles and responsibilities during VUCA. I think the term VUCA might still be new to some of us, or may not be clear what we're looking at VUCA. So when we're talking about VUCA, we're talking about volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous conditions. And I think the last 2 years have been a real testament to what VUCA is and what VUCA and how it affects us, even though the conversations about VUCA and also some of the strategies have been addressed much earlier. So we're looking at like 3-4 decades of conversations about VUCA, but how we experience VUCA and how real it is very much the last 2 years, and even the last month with issues relating to flood and how that's affecting our community. So we cannot run away from really facing it, facing VUCA and addressing how that affects us as a whole. Okay, I think to start the conversation, we need to, as a sociologist, I think we always have to bring it back to the larger picture. So I want to emphasize the academics and the academia community. We do not exist in a vacuum. Sometimes the kinds of conversations that we have about academic responsibility, academic roles, or our institutions in particular, whether it be IIUM or the higher institution, we seem to be talking about them as separate entities without understanding that these interactions and these relationships exist together, and we're all part of the larger community, always interconnected, always interdependent and interrelated. So change in one will have an impact on the other, and also the activeness or lack of activeness and awareness on one part of the system will impact others. So just as how we would see an organism, for example, if there's pain in one area, it can impact other areas, and also the health and well-being of the larger system also impacts the smaller systems. So when we're talking about academics and academia, particularly looking at VUCA, we have to observe certain things. Number one, we will look at the global trends. What are the changing global trends, not just in academia, but in the social world in general? How are the trends changing and shifting? And this is something that's more volatile, more uncertain, more complex and ambiguous as the days go by. So that's something we want to look at. The other one we want to look at is pre-existing academic practices and cultures. And we have to view this more critically to know that academic practices and cultures are not static, they're not stagnant, they're not things that are written in stone. Academia is a social construct that we build together, human, whether consciously or unconsciously, and we continue to uphold it all the time as we recreate the system, or we just we're just remaking the system as whether we are agents or whether we are actors of the system. So the academic culture itself is something that's dynamic, whether we want to change it or we're just unconsciously doing certain things and just recreating it every day. So if we're looking at academic cultures, we also have to understand the global trends of academia. For example, the rates of academics leaving academia because of their concern about well-being of academics, the rates of academics leaving academia because they want to do more impactful, more meaningful work. So all of these trends of academics living within the academic system and academic culture, be it issues that we find and sometimes we don't want to look at, or we refuse to address because it's painful, or issues relating to plagiarism, issues relating to over publication, the quality of publication, impact factors, ranking, and these are all the trends that affect us. And then also situating our institution and then where we are in the world and where we are within the local context, existing as an institution under the Ministry of Education in Malaysia, and where Malaysia stands within the academic system as a whole in the society. So we have to understand issues relating to resources, issues relating to cultures of developing nations competing against other nations, and how that puts us in the world, or who's making those decisions for us. So that would be things that we need to think about when we're thinking about academics and we're thinking about ourselves as academics, so that we are conscious about the decisions we make and the kind of actions we take moving forward. And then also realizing how it affects our students, who we are relaying and disseminating the knowledge to or sharing in a new age of pedagogy, where we're thinking about new ways of learning and new ways of education, looking at futures of education. For example, we are lucky because we are in an institution which actively engage at the global level to look at futures of education. So we also notice that these are concerns that we have in terms of the inequality of access to education and how that affects people's real and social lives. So our role in addressing those things as well, and how we are impacted by that in terms of our academic culture as IIUM academics, and how we are trying to fit in or not fit in, what kind of image we are bringing and identity we're bringing. And then as we discuss academics and academia, we also have to remember that academics are also human beings, and human beings are diverse and we're different and we carry different identities. Some of us may be going through different challenges in our lives, or at different stages of our lives where we have health implications or personal life implications. So these parts of the human academic is not separate to who we are. And then we also have intersections of identity. Some of us we need to consider also how these identities affects our life and affects the system in general in terms of our gender, our age, our ethnicity, our nationality, and how we experience life as academics. So that's also another area to look at. And then as academics existing in Gombak or in Kuantan or in Gambang or other campuses, we also have to understand the local context, the local social conditions around us, who are around us, how are we connected to those outside of our campus or outside of the screen, in terms of how our day-to-day things affect them and how they're affecting us. The kinds of students that we have and who are our students, these are impacted by the social and cultural conditions, their perspective of education, whether they are wanting to engage in meaningful education or they've been trained to focus on exams, or they've been trained to focus on getting the qualification rather than understanding the value of knowledge. All of that is part and parcel of existing within academia and being academic members. Okay, so we go back to VUCA, because as we are talking about all of this contextualizing and situating ourselves, we must also understand how, like I said just now, how volatile, how complex, how uncertain and ambiguous things are becoming every day. So these are like 4 concepts that we can look at in trying to understand the shifts that are happening. So when we say volatile, we're looking at rapid changes. So we don't know what's going to come, what's going to happen. So it may be unstable, duration unknown. For example, in the case of the global pandemic, there's like 3 years, 5 years, lockdowns, MCO. So these are things that happen and we don't know how it's happening and when it's happening. And then we also have uncertainty in terms of not having enough information to predict the next outcome. And this may be directly related to the decisions we're making as individual academics or at the management level, or we're making as individuals living in our own personal lives. And then there's also complexity. We live in a world where there's a lot of information. We might not have enough information. In fact, we might have so much information. The volume of information may be overwhelming so much so that it's complex for us to figure out, okay, if I do this, what's going to happen next? If we take on this approach, it may be complex in terms of trying to figure out the interconnectedness of the issues. And then we also have ambiguity, where things are happening, new ways of doing things that we're not sure of. We don't know where it's coming from. So that these are things that we have to consider as we move forward. It's not something that we, as much as it's uncomfortable and it's always going to be taking us outside of our comfort level. I think maybe in the last 10 years, we can say, get out of your comfort zone. In the current setting, we don't have a choice, but we're always in an uncomfortable zone. So we have to learn to be comfortable being in an uncomfortable position. So we have to start considering how are we going to embrace VUCA and then moving forward with VUCA. So the kinds of VUCA that we're experiencing at the global level, I take this from Ipsos report on the changing global trends. So the 10 mega changes that we are looking at in the next 30 or so years. So number 1 is the dynamic population trends. We know that there will be an increase in population to 9.7 billion in 2050. And then most of the population, because of the increase of life expectancy, we know that most of the population will be aging population. So we'll have more elderly populations within our society. And then we also have growing opportunities because of the access to internet, because of the access to education, However, access to internet, access to technology, access to education isn't always equal. So this actually expands or increases the gap of inequality within our people as a whole, as a society, and affects certain populations more than other populations. And it becomes a multiplying factor also. And then we also have the rise of mega cities where more people will move into the urban, and the urban cities will grow bigger. And so we will have different issues relating to social conditions, health conditions, and also cultural conditions of the urban. And this will definitely affect how the rural is also perceived and how the rural experience life. So when we talk about mega cities, we're not just looking at the urban, we're also looking at the implications on the rural. And then more so than ever, we're always connected today, and there are so many platforms, so many social media platforms for us to collect information, for us to share information, for us to gather our thoughts, for us to think about things. And at the same time, all of this information and data that's being pushed out also becomes a source of economy. It becomes what we call a surveillance capitalism, the algorithm, how we are actively behaving online, and the behaviors online that are taken to be used for market economy and things like that. That also affects our lives. How much privacy we have in terms of GPS or in terms of the information we relay out, and how that affects our lives. And also then how that part of our lives that is online, just like how we are connected now on Zoom, affects our behavior in our day-to-day physical life. And then we have changing trends also in health and sickness, how for some access to healthcare is improving, access to sanitation is improving, but we also know that 1 in 3 people in the world are not having access to sanitation. So even the basic needs of sanitation, even though it's increasing in terms of access, a lot more people are not having them, and they come from a particular group. So this is another example of rise in inequalities. And then the kinds of sickness that we have today, apart from how connected we are and how the pandemic can spread much faster, we're also looking at lifestyle issues in terms of our health, how much sitting down we're doing, how much screen time we're doing, what kind of foods we're consuming. All of that also affects our society. And then we have the rise of the individual choice and the fracturing of mass markets, the kind of markets, it may seem like it doesn't affect us, but it really does. And how a lot of the mass market shifts also change the way we do things, whether it be education or our day-to-day life, whether people are going to enroll in education institution or they are going to take on smaller courses. So say they want to study sociology, they might not want to go and study at university. They might choose to take one course at a time at a different institution. So having customized or ability to do things at people's own pace and the way that they want to is increasing. So that changes the market also. And then we also see the rise of the individual and the decline of the social cohesion. And this is particularly worrying because we see distancing, right? When we talk about social distance, sometimes we're thinking about the pandemic, but when we're talking about social distance, we're also looking at how willing we are to bring things together, how much we are willing to care and take on the understanding of others and how close we relate to others. And this also impacts how we feel about other people and the kinds of tensions that may exist, how we feel about others, right? If we're talking about migration, we're talking about refugees, these are concerns that we need to have as well as wealth gaps and gender gaps. And then we also find that there is cultural convergences. So we see that there are merging of certain types of cultures, and we see that people are coming together in terms of certain areas of life, right? And we also see that when people converge in some areas, it sometimes expands or accelerates some types of extremism. And this relates back to the previous point of social cohesion. The next one I think is of particular importance is people as being always on, but also people wanting to be off the grid. And there is a real big shift in terms of how people understand professional life and career work. In today's world, people care more about work-life balance, although I have some contention about the word work-life balance because work is part of our life, and also the word work is limited to paid and valued work, whereas we have like care work, which is very important but undervalued economically, also socially undervalued. So, but in the contemporary context, as we're looking at the changing trends, people are realizing the importance of having that balance, or making sure that their life is not just about career progression. So that's something that's very real about people noticing the social implications of a career-driven life. So success is being redefined. So as opposed to working or having life purpose in terms of progressing in their careers, people are moving away from that to having flexible jobs and working less hours globally. And then we also have, oh, I'm so sorry, there's a typo there, the emergence of public opinions as a revolutionary force. With the rise of social media and the conditions of the economy, with people having more precarious jobs, like the gig economy, for example, and the instability of time, so brought about by VUCA, we find that the masses, there is a growing mass of people who are susceptible to certain extreme thoughts and easily manipulated and easily made vulnerable by the conditions. So that's another issue that we need to look at in terms of how that's affecting our society, and the voices or the rising voices, whether these voices are manipulated voices or not. So these are concerns that we have, and this affects us as academics in terms of how we want to think of ourselves and how we want to move forward. And then we cannot run away, obviously, from the changing academic trends as well, with the changing global trends. So I take some of these concepts from the UNESCO Future of Education report that was published just last year. We know that academic trends, or especially for academics, the past years and decades have been about productivity, have been about publication, have been about, it's very hierarchical in nature, it's a top-down approach, but in moving forward, the emphasis now is more about fluidity and flexibility, that it should be governed by concepts of equality, that it's about collaboration, breaking the silos. These are conversations that we are having more now, and we realize now, and the university constantly has this kind of conversations about rather than being producers of contents, right? We want to ensure that we are creating impactful change also, and making sure that our work is meaningful and impactful. So there is also a change and shift in academic trends, and I think the respected professors who were my lecturers and who were lecturers of my lecturers here have seen these kinds of changing trends over the decades, and would be able to see the shift of the academic trend. Okay, I think when we come back to, like, we have gone to the global scale or the macro scale, we have to go back to the academics and who we are. I think it's important to highlight that academics are products. We are also actors and agents of the system, and how far we are as products, agents, and actors really depends on not just ourselves, but also the system itself. So our students and all of us are somehow products of our system and our identities, where we come from, our own capacities, our individual traits, the education system in which we were groomed, the resources that those education system had, the socioeconomic environment that we came from produced us as individuals who are products of the education system, right? And then as we enter into academia as academics, we become agents of the system. So we are the product of the academic parentage, and then we recreate, or we continue to do what was taught to us and how we are taught. So the academic culture here is important. So for example, as academics, our supervision, the experience of doing postgraduate work, and then the environment recreates, and then we become agents of the system. But then I think it's also important to highlight that we can choose to move forward to become actors of the system rather than agents, to show that there is more conscious and more proactive role that we can take, and also gives us more autonomy to decide how to change the system rather than just reproducing the system. So the academic actor has more autonomy, and the academic actor also takes more consciousness to exercise their will to create certain types of changes, or to acknowledge that they have a role to recreate, to change, or to steer the direction away. So whether we are teachers, whether we are researchers, whether we are acting our role as supervisors, we can bring autonomy to that, and we can try to exercise our will so that we're not just reproducing the same system that that is there. If there are certain problems to it, or if we are wanting to shift to address pertinent issues of the global trend, we are taking that active role, and also we are considering that all of the things that we do and how we are doing them recreates the system. So we have to empower ourselves to become actors rather than just products and agents. So finally, we go down to the roles and responsibilities. And I think we know as academics what our roles and responsibilities are. We do teaching and learning, we do consultancy work, research, innovation, publication, and supervision. So all of these works can be separate. They can be things that we do separately, whether it's teaching, whether it's consultancy, or we can also do them coherently and cohesively. We can synergize them to ensure that they are things that we can do together, that a certain project that we do can include all of these areas. But then again, we need to also understand that whether or not the system allows us to do this. So we go back to individual understanding of our roles, and then also working together with the system to ensure that we can perform our roles in a synergized way, so it makes sense. And I think the question is, what is the situation of IIUM academics in terms of upholding our roles and responsibilities? And I think it's really amazing that ASA had conducted 2 research last year on the current state of academics in IIM during VUCA in particular. And it gives us a better understanding of the context in which we come from and the academics that are living within our system, so that we can figure out solutions that are going to be accessible to us, and we can also understand where we are lacking perhaps. So we know that from the study, which is done, I think, from the lecturers in the psychology department, so well done, that our academics have passion in fulfilling the TCRIPs. So they do have an understanding, and they do have want to perform and to take on the TCRIPs, all the responsibilities and roles. And I think that's something that's very optimistic for us to look at our academics and ourselves as academics. But however, the lack of understanding of within the system to allow administrative tasks. And this is something perhaps needs to be emphasized and needs to be talked about as well. So how this could be taken on is the suggestion from the research is to have better management and support from the organization to ensure that there is good synergy, not just in terms of academic performing the TCRIP, but at the systems level, there is good synergy for the system to allow academics to do and perform their roles justly. And I think we also have to talk about resources and facilities in terms of performing the roles, because as much as academics may want to fulfill their role, we also need to consider what are the resources that are required and facilities that are required, especially in the VUCA world, as we're moving and shifting to online, and we're moving to using more technological advanced materials and the digitization of things. We also need to consider how our facilities are at the current state. And with VUCA also, I think we all have to upgrade ourselves and we all have to upskill ourselves. So continuous learning and training is something that academics are looking for and appreciative of when the management continues to do this. So the proactiveness and willingness of academics to meet VUCA is something that's necessary. So as academics, we want to be able to not resist VUCA, but rather learn to figure out how do we get onto it in a productive way and in a way that helps everybody. So we want to ensure that we have the ability and the access to upgrade ourselves as well. And I think the other thing we want to address is the diversity in terms of our roles and needs across the different fields. And with the Kuliah of Islamic Revealed Knowledge and Human Sciences, we are quite a unique Kuliah because we hope that we achieve an integration between the revealed knowledge and human sciences. And during VUCA conditions in particular, this is something that I'm adding. During the VUCA conditions in particular, I think we have to not put ourselves down, but acknowledge how much expertise we actually have in this area and how our expertise and the skills we have acquired, or the skills that our academics have acquired, gives us more ability to see the trends in terms of human issues, and that's not to be undermined. And I think if we have that kind of empowerment, our academics can grow and notice the importance of highlighting. And this is again situating our kuliah or our field within the larger education field or knowledge field, and how there's always an overemphasis of STEM. But we know that with social issues or just human issues in general, the need for revealed knowledge and human sciences and the integration of both is a pertinent, or there's a big gap to fulfill, or that's the missing key to these areas. And that's not just about us not knowing that, it's also the emphasis of others realizing, recognizing and also respecting these skills and expertise that our academics have at the kuliah. So moving forward, I think I'm just about to wrap up now. So moving forward, I think there is a need to reimagine a Sejahtera academic profession. And we talk about Sejahtera as our university's way of moving forward and values. So we have given a lot of emphasis in terms of increasing Sejahtera in our curriculum, increasing the concept of Sejahtera for our students, but also I think we can take an active role to reimagine what Sejahtera looks like as an academic profession and how we take on those academic professions and then apply our roles and responsibilities there. So I think these are some suggestions that I have, and I'm sure that many others here have more suggestions and wider field of knowledge and different areas in which they are able to see that. So I'm sure there will be more conversations around these issue. So I think what we want to do is, in order for us to be part of the larger system meaningfully and to be understanding of our roles as academic actors, we have to have more meaningful engagements internally in terms of how we talk to each other, how often we talk to each other about different issues, about our specializations and our direction and vision, but also the conversations that we would have with others outside, and that these engagements need to be meaningful engagements and not like a touch and go. So we have to create a system where we can have this, and we have to build cultures around how we can learn to have meaningful engagements with others outside of our community and within our community. I also feel that there needs to be conscious, active, and responsive, both systemic and individual awareness and changes, meaning that as individuals and individual academics taking on our roles and responsibilities seriously, we are learning about how the world is changing, and we have the responsibility to consciously look at them and to actively understand our role and then to respond to them consciously also. So that's something that we do as individuals, and understanding our roles within the system, we also have to know that there needs to be also systemic changes. With the kinds of actions that we take, I think those with more authority and power would have more responsibilities to consider how we affect others. As lecturers, for example, who are teaching, we have to know that we have more authority to ensure that we create a Sejahtera system. And as management, people have more authority also to create more Sejahtera system. So the systemic changes needs to happen, the individual changes needs to happen. So this has to go concurrently and coherently. I think with the global trends shifting to people wanting and addressing and acknowledge the humanness of our lives and how that affects our paid work life and also our unpaid care work, we also want to reimagine a system or a professional system that is more human, that considers the different individualities or different intersections and needs that humans have at different levels of our lives, so that we can retain the expertise and skills and when we can have meaningful kind of participation of valuable participation of our members. So in introducing and sustaining a humanized profession, then we can allow for our academics to perform their roles and responsibilities better, so that we can retain these valuable assets, or valuable people, not just assets, but also valuable humans that contribute to our system. The other one, I think what we can do as well is we have to constantly consider, and I think this is not something foreign to IIUM, it's something that we've always done, but to see the applicability and the effectiveness of our value-driven and high-touch approach, how we are moving forward in terms of our TCRIPs, how to ensure that it's value-driven, that when we are publishing, we're thinking about our values as we're doing research and consultancy, we are able to incorporate our values into them, and that it's high touch. So when we do research, we are thinking about human beings and the social impacts of our research on human beings and how that can be applied impactfully and meaningfully. So that will be all from me. Thank you so much. Thank you again to organizing committees. And I would like to take an opportunity to apologize in case I've said anything wrong. If I've not highlighted certain issues, please correct me. And also do share your thoughts. And please feel free to email me any other comments or thoughts that anybody would have. Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you very much, Dr. Fatima, for her explanation and sharing that I think very that will benefit us, especially in this VUCA world. All right, so we have reached to a Q&A session. So our participants can ask in the chat box, and I will try to read them, and I'll pass the questions to our speaker. All right, so the first question is, what is the role of religion in responding to shifting notions and sociologically dependent views on concepts such as work-life balance, well-being, and work, and etc.?
Give me a moment to reread the question by Dr. Adli. I think, please correct me if I'm wrong. Obviously, I'm not an expert in religious studies or the sociology of religion, but I think if we're looking at things sociologically, we also have to constantly consider the social context in which things are happening. As much as as Muslims, we believe that our religion is as so, right? We have our texts and we have our Aqidah and principles that guide us. But we also know that there are shifts in cultural context and there are shifts in social context in terms of how we live our life, right? Work-life balance is not something that is forever. Work-life balance is something that is constructed based on a particular time and space. So it is, and I think it's an integrated kind of responsibilities for sociologists as well as those from revealed knowledge to come together and address these issues. So obviously I don't have answers to a lot of these questions today, but I think this is a great opportunity for us to start new conversations and new connections to figure out some of the solutions here. Shall we move on to the next question?
All right. Okay. For the next question, just asking if there is other possibility looking to our conditions today with more relevance to particularities of Islamic worldview, Islamic system, and Muslim culture. Sometimes we look to ourselves and our condition with the eyes of others, which usually make our projections, plans, and action less efficient in addressing our issues.
Absolutely, I really agree with that. When we are looking at issues, sometimes we unknowingly have taken on the lens of others. So I think that's the importance of bringing it back to context and bringing it back to our context. I think in the past few decades, the solution has always been one size fits all approach, but we're shifting away from that. So a one size fits all approach is not just in terms of the solution, but also rethinking the problems and noticing the conditions that are happening with lens that are, like I said, value driven based on whose values. So when we're talking about value driven for us in particular, it would be based on our values as Muslims, and also understanding the context of Muslim conditions and how we are interacting with others.
Okay, I think the next one is not a question, but thank you, Dr. Fatima. It is good to know that change must take place not just in an individual, but it also must happen at a systematic level too. Too much emphasis has to be given on one or the other. All right. So I guess, is there any other questions maybe from the participants?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Dr. Fatima. Thank you so much for this wonderful lecture, mashallah. It was very informative, wonderful, and motivational. Thank you so much. I just want to say here that always when we talk about the profession, we all focus on the profession of focusing on this worldly profession development. And since we are from the Islamic University and from IRKH, and we have to add to it perhaps Islamization as well. And this Islamization, I believe we have to make a balance between the worldly life and the hereafter life. We don't have this kind of, whenever we talk about the profession, writing, publication, this kind of thing is coming in. And also when we produce the graduates, whether they can do a wonderful job, when they go to their work, everything is focusing on the worldly life only. I believe we need to make a balance between this world and that world as well. This worldly life and that worldly life. Because the real success comes when we make a balance. In Surah Al-Qasas, page number 10, the last ayah, Allah said, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَابْتَغِي فِي مَا آتَاكَ اللَّهُ الدَّارَ الْآخِرَةِ وَلَا تَنْسَ نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا. Allah said here, these were the Bani Israel, they were telling Qarun that whatever Allah has given you, utilize it to get this success in hereafter, but don't forget this worldly life. So meaning there is a balance. There is a balance between the worldly life and the hereafter. And we need to remember that Allah sent the Prophet ﷺ to educate humankind. If you look at this Surah Al-Jumu'ah, ayah number 2, in the beginning, هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كان من قبل لفي ضلال مبين. Allah sent the Prophet to the unlettered people, رسولا منهم, a prophet from them, يتلو عليهم آياته, to read the Quranic ayat for them and to train them, educate them. So this education training basically focusing on the success in both worlds. The Prophet, we know that he was the leader and he was the trainer and he was educator. And what kind of education we need? Allah has praised the educator and those who are educated. If you look at the Surah Zumar, page number 2, there Allah has mentioned who are the real knowledgeable people. Allah said, لا يستوي الذين يعلمون والذين لا يعلمون إنما يتذكر أولو الألباب. The learned and unlearned or ignorant, they cannot be equal. Who are these learned people? If you just read the ayah before it, أَمَّنْ هُوَ قَانِتٌ آنَاءَ اللَّيْلِ سَاجِدًا وَقَائِمًا يَحْذَرُ الْآخِرَةَ وَيَرْجُو رَحْمَةَ رَبِّهِ قُلْ هَلْ يَسْتَوِي الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Allah said, those who devote themselves آنَاءَ اللَّيْلِ, during the night time, for Allah. Right, for Allah. أَمَّنْ هُوَ قَانِتٌ آنَاءَ اللَّيْلِ سَاجِدًا, in sujood, وَقَائِمًا, in qiyam, meaning doing qiyam al-layl. يَحْذَرُ الْآخِرَةَ, they are afraid of the hereafter. وَيَرْجُو رَحْمَةَ رَبِّهِ, and they want to get the mercy of Allah, they want to get the Jannah. So I believe that we need to make a balance. And from IRKHs and human sciences, right, with Abdul Hamid Abu Sulaiman, human sciences, we need to make a balance here. And we have to add not only producing the professionals, but there should be a balanced personality. Their morality should come in. And this part, I believe we have to focus more. Thank you so much.
So Dr. Usmani, that's a beautiful sharing. I think that's some really important values that we can look at. And I think that's a good reminder also. I benefit from that sharing. Thank you so much.
Assalamualaikum, Dr. Fatima.
Yes, Prof.
Well done. I enjoyed your session. I think it is really, you have really raised issues that's looking at us in the face, but nobody wants to talk about it. But I think we are still at the level of what? Definition level, what we need to do, what should we do. I'm interested in the how. So how do we move forward? I think there should be another session on this as a follow-up of this talk, whereby we really address the problem we face as academic. Yeah. You talk about dialogue, you talk about having a two-way conversation. Who's going to facilitate that? How are we going to do this moving forward? Because we all know that we are non-functional because of overloading of work, doing things which we do not, which is not necessary. What we should be doing, we don't do, So I would like to have some response on this and way forward after this talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. I think that's really important also to emphasize on how we can move forward. Yeah, probably not, the responses shouldn't be coming from me, but yeah, I think this is a important aspect of our lives in terms of being active actors of the academic world, in terms of not just improving ourselves, but improving the system, so we don't, recreate systems that are that creates, jaded academics, or academics that lose motivation and value in what we can do and what we are able to do and what we want to do actually. So I hope that there is a way forward for all of us to improve the situation.
Right. Is there any other questions? No.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullah. Dr. Fatima, thank you very much for your very enlightening speech. I thought I read question just now talking about work-life balance and the role of religion. I thought it comes from Dr. Adeli. What the sociologists would say, would define work-life balance in the context of the balance between the world and the hereafter, ad-dunya wal akhirah. Thank you.
What a challenging question for me to address. I think maybe we can talk about the concept of work-life balance sociologically first. I personally find that there are a few issues with the terminology of work-life balance, because it's as though work and life are two distinct concepts, but actually in terms of defining work and how we place work is also important. When we say work here, we assume that it's employed paid work, but we don't consider reproductive work and care work that everybody is doing that holds up our whole system. The kind of work that most women would do in terms of taking care of their families, in terms of taking care of the home, taking care of children, for example, and then also other types of work that we do outside of paid valued, and that's really based on the system that we live in. And then also understanding notions of life. So much of the framework of work-life balance does not really come from our values, I think, as Muslims, because we do not acknowledge where the placements of things are and the importance of things, because the framework of work-life balance itself has an emphasis on paid and employed work. So I would think that we would need to start with that and then rethink about how, as Muslims, we have to understand what work looks like for us, whether work is purely paid and unpaid, and where there may be also inequalities in terms of the pay of work and the value of certain types of jobs that we give, right? Some types of jobs and some types of work are valued more and paid more as opposed to other types of job that maybe from our perspectives are not equal. So how we are valuing those types of work would also be something that we need to look at. So, and then finding the balance of that and drawing from our literature, from like the Quran and Sunnah, in trying to figure out what is work-life balance or what is life balance. And I think that's meant to be our Sejahtera kind of framework, isn't it? Or at least our IUM framework, to look at the world from our lens and then building a framework. So I don't have the answers to that at the moment. I think we start a conversation so that those of us who are experts in this field, or we can come together and work together to build a more, to build a more reasonable or a more a framework that really relates to us and comes from our values. So that would be something that I would suggest. Yeah, because I don't have the answers in terms of, because I don't have the expertise in terms of Quran and Sunnah to build on what it would look like in terms of that area of our life in managing the different aspects of our life. But I think we can draw from prophetic traditions and then understanding the current situational context and then merging those and integrating those.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Dr. Fatima. Actually, here mentioned the balance between dunya and akhirah and the role of religion, and how we can look into this VUCA situation from a Islamic worldview perspective. All these things, I think, Dr. Fatima, you can have a new insights if you try to define the VUCA from a spiritual faith-based perspective. Maybe the kind of ambiguity, the uncertainty might be a little bit different or extended when we look into from a Islamic perspective. So I think that from there we can start talking about how can we do this kind of work, life, dunya and akhirah, profession, this and that. Thank you so much.
That's very interesting. Perhaps next time we can have Dr. Said Muhsin to talk about that in HadissusSobah. So hopefully to listen from you in one of the HadissusSobah.
Inshallah, thank you. We can do it.
All right, so I believe that we have come to the end of our Q&A session. Thank you everyone for asking, and thank you Dr. Fatima for the answer. All right, so on behalf of the organizer, I would like to thank Yang Berbahagia Dr. Fatima for inspiring us on our roles and responsibilities, especially in this VUCA environment. And we hope that everyone will embrace and uphold your words of wisdom in the journey to be a successful academics and researchers in the future, inshallah. Right, I would also like to take this opportunity to apologize for my shortcomings in hosting this session. I wish the organizers, the participants, all the best, and may Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala bless our efforts in this journey of knowledge. All right, before we end, let's turn on our camera so that we can take a picture to treasure this memory. One, two, three. Once again. 1, 2, 3. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. And that is end our session today with Tasbih Kafarah and Surah Al-Nasr. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much. Barakallahu fikum jami'an.
Thank you, Dr. Fatima. Thank you, Sister Amira.